They could be thinking critically about your business. They could be running analyses. They could be doing patient outreach. They could be sort of surfacing recommendations, stuff like that. And I think that increasingly the output layer is going to be more like a set of agents that you work with and almost like a ChatGPT-like assistant that will know everything about your practice. That data will still be coming out of the PMS. That will be the kind of store, but I think the ways in which you can now interact with your practice's reality are...
Hey there, dental economist. If you're a dentist owner or a leader within a dental business thinking about growing production, case acceptance, patient and staff satisfaction, positive outcomes, and everything else that comes with running a dental business, then you're a dental economist, and you've come to the right place. Welcome to the Dental Economist Show. We're meeting at the intersection of profit and purpose as I sit down with dental leaders who share their stories about dentistry, business, and growth. Welcome back to the Dental Economist Show. I'm your host, Mike Huffaker. Before we dive in, a quick reminder, if you're enjoying the show, please be sure to like, follow, leave a review. Your support really helps us bring more valuable conversations to the dental business community. Today, we are joined by Ophir Tanz, an award-winning entrepreneur and AI innovator who is transforming the dental industry. Ophir is the founder and CEO of Pearl, an AI company leading the charge in AI-powered dental diagnostics and software integrations. Prior to Pearl, he built and scaled GumGum, a company that pioneered AI applications in digital media and sports sponsorships. Ophir, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Good to see you. Thanks for having me.
Good to see you as well. First off, real quick, if you're listening to this podcast and you know Ophir, you got to do me a favor, because since Ophir found out he was going to be on my podcast, all he does is talk about how he was on this other Open Wide podcast with Janesh Patel and how many people heard him on that podcast. So it's ophir@hellopearl.com, and just send him a note, say, hi, hey, Ophir, heard you, so I can fill his cool.
Please email me. It's funny because I do all these bunch of dental podcasts and I pretty much never hear anything about it after they're done. And they kind of just go to the ether. I assume nobody has ever listened to any of these episodes. And then interestingly, with the Jeanette Open Wide one, a bunch of people reached out, which was just a unique experience. I don't know what was different there. Maybe they have a bigger audience.
I don't know. Maybe. I feel like it's a personal challenge. So I thought I would just throw down the gauntlet, right at the outset. Reach out to Ophir, let him know that you heard him. And now it's going to be really embarrassing if you don't have anybody reach out. I'll just feel I guess I don't know what to tell you, Ophir. So, well, hey, let's maybe start at an unconventional spot, which is the future. And I have heard you talk a bit about your vision for what you call a headless PMS solution. And maybe you can share a little bit about where you see technology and dental going. Let's skip over just the radiographic AI portion, which I think probably the majority of this audience is really familiar with the diagnostic portion of what you all do from an AI perspective. I know you're diving into RCM. We'll get to that in a second. But if you just want to kind of put your futurist hat on and say 5 years from now, what do things look like? How is it different?
I think things are going to look very different than they do today. I think not only in vertical applications like the operations of a dental practice, but much all vertical applications of businesses, and also just kind of societally how we're operating. There's a lot of very profound things happening at the moment because you now have, which is net new, is a cognitive layer that could think and do kind of white collar like work reliably at scale, cost effectively. And then the question becomes, how does that reality manifest itself? In our case, we're very focused on the operations of dental practices. I don't think the PMS is going to go away. I should also say, we have no interest in becoming a PMS ourselves. We sort of are powering a lot of things increasingly and operating as plumbing. But I think the PMS is still going to be very central to the operations of a dental practice. I just think in many ways it becomes less visible. And what I mean by that is if you think about it, there's kind of an input component and an output component as it relates to a PMS, right? You're getting data inside of it, and then you want to ultimately pull insights and data out of it at points as well. So focusing on the input layer for a moment, if you think about it, there's just a huge amount of input that needs to go into the PMS so that it is a proper system of record and store of data. So you have patient scheduling, you have clinical notes and patient information and insurance information and claims oriented RCM activity. And you have various forms of things like charting, like perio charting and odontogram charting, kind of on and on. And in order for that data to make its way into the PMS, typically a human has to input it. Now, that's problematic if it's not done well and not done completely and not done accurately. It's a significant time suck. Nobody really enjoys doing these things. You do it because you have to. And what I think is going to change with this technology is that all of these input components are going to increasingly get automated away. So again, if you look at things like charting and insurance verification and scheduling, like there will no longer need to be a human being inputting that information into the PMS. And that's really nice because if it's getting input automatically in a high quality manner, you have a very pristine system of record, which is obviously great for management and business operations and liability and enterprise value, especially in an enterprise environment, which I know it's your area of focus and a big part of all as well. And they're going to return a massive amount of time back to the practice so that they can do things that they fundamentally are going to move the needle and ultimately serve patients. So we are very involved in creating this automation layer as sort of a set of solutions that we feel that we have a good handle on, are really well positioned to build. And you're going to see this manifest itself in different ways. In some cases, you're going to see ambitious PMS platforms go and want to do some of this input layer manifestation themselves. And that's great. Like, I think one way or another, regardless of kind of who gets us there and how, which is obviously somewhat up in the air, I think that endpoint is kind of inevitable. And I think similarly on the output layer, we're moving to a very agent-based reality. That is kind of the next wave of AI. Like you can ask it questions and it can return answers, but we're moving to a kind of task-oriented, increasingly an agent-based reality where you can effectively ask these AI-oriented agents to do tasks on your behalf in the background. So you don't have to actively be interfacing with them. They're living in the cloud, doing work for you. They could be thinking critically about your business. They could be running analyses. They could be doing patient outreach. They could be sort of surfacing recommendations, stuff like that. And I think that increasingly the output layer is going to be more like a set of agents that you work with and almost like a ChatGPT-like assistant that will know everything about your practice. That data will still be coming out of the PMS. That will be the kind of store, but I think the ways in which you can now interact with your practices in reality are going to be more kind of much more alive and varied.
So let's go to the radiographic AI for a second, talk a little bit about that, like the future of these AI companies in dental, because you're obviously broadening the scope of what you all do at Pearl. And if I think back to when AI first kind of started to come out on the image side and really pick up steam, it seemed at that moment in time, it was kind of like the FDA clearance wars. Everybody's like, oh, well, we have this clearance, but we have this clearance. And that was the product differentiator at that time. And there's a huge amount of complexity in the models and the machine learning that you all have built to do the diagnostic assistance, which I think you were brilliant in the naming of it as second opinion. It's a great way of framing it. But I think from outside observers looking in, they would think at some point, the actual diagnostic assistance is going to be somewhat commoditized, and there will be these models maybe more readily available. I know you guys spent a lot to make the models that you have, but what will be the differentiator for these companies as they grow and mature? And you seem to be veering into the RCM space significantly, but can you share a little bit about like how you think about the path to take where there is and becomes separation in the radiographic AI area and how broad you feel like you need to go as an organization?
Yeah, good question. Look, I think that you can't do this kind of work without a regulatory clearance domestically and abroad. So it makes sense when there's a new technology for that to be a key area of focus because you can't actually deliver the value unless you receive clearances. It's about to happen again, by the way, in 3D. It's going to be another FDA war, and everyone's going to be talking about FDA, and then in 2 or 3 years, it'll be done, and nobody's going to be talking about that. Now, if you are 1, 2, 3 years, or even 6 months ahead of someone else in your ability to start servicing that use case, you're going to get customers, you're going to be able to refine it, and you're kind of better positioned. So the regulatory war is sort of relevant, but you're right, over time does and should fade away because it's really not the point. I don't know if this capability is going to become totally commoditized. It might, but like if you look at the reality right now, there's 3 companies that do this kind of work and everyone's investing heavily into it, the ones that are doing it and increasingly getting pretty good at it. So I don't think the question is really like, is my set of clearances better than yours, or is my caries detection better than yours? It really becomes a function of the holistic go-to-market that you are pursuing. And if you actually look at the space, I think the companies maybe at a glance feel kind of similar, but if you go a level deeper, very different in terms of philosophy and go-to-market strategy. And I've always said from day one that like the company with a winning philosophy will ultimately take 80+% of the market. If you think about it, if we're all doing exactly the same thing, telling exactly the same story, going after exactly the same customers, it would kind of, and we're just kind of fighting on features and benefits. First of all, that's not an attractive business to be running day to day. It's not fun or interesting, but also you could assume in that scenario, everyone would get a third of the market and that'd be fair. But you're actually seeing something very different manifest. And not to talk my buck too much, but like we're getting substantially more market share than our competition at the moment. And the reason for that is a philosophical difference in how we go about getting this into the hands of customers in a manner that is very sticky, reliable, and successful. So we, as you know, and this is work that we're obviously doing with you guys at the forefront, take a highly integrated approach. Now, we take a highly integrated approach because when you think about adding to a core task or a core capability, whether that's RCM or scheduling or the imaging system, radiologic AI capability, whatever it may be, the key is utilization. If people are not using your product, then you're not driving value. Now, what we've seen, and you see this in all forms of healthcare, is companies come out with good products and everyone acknowledges that they're good products and they're helpful. But they also have an issue with these products when they're not embedded into an existing workflow because they have to go outside of that environment that they're super comfortable in. There are very few interfaces that they interact with routinely, and they have to go try to get that core value. And especially in an enterprise environment where the owner of the practice didn't raise their hand and say, I want this, and they're going to go through some discomfort to use it, you need to create very seamless workflows that are in line with the day-to-day tasks. And I think that that's really where Pearl is highly differentiated, is because as we do with XV Web and also Denticon, you're able to extract this value that is very significant when utilized, and you're able to extract it with a very little amount of change management and very little, basically no workflow change. And I think that if you look at that, plus the go-to-market on the SMB side, plus enterprise, plus distributor relations, there's a very involved set of machinery that we've built to kind of get this into all the nooks and crannies of the industry, which I think is very unique and differentiated. So we're just focused on customer delight and customer happiness. It would be better for me, Mike, if I didn't have to necessarily have a partnership with you because I tell my capabilities directly. And we on our development team didn't have to constantly pound their heads on pavement, and we didn't have to like give up economics and all that stuff. But like we do it because it's a thing that works and it's a thing that's better for customers, and it really does work much better. So it's worth the effort.
I think it's a really important distinction. And the term integration is thrown around really loosely in this industry. And integrations between a practice management solution and some third-party software vary dramatically in the effectiveness and utility. And you use the term embedded, which is super important, I think, in particular when you have a clinical solution, because folks are living right there in that core system of record.
It's a really good point. People throw around the term integration very loosely, and it gets very confusing. We're talking about deep embedded integrations that really live in the existing workflow of the practice. And that is just a really game-changing approach, because if you think about it, you go to a large-scale DSO, let's say they have 500 practices, and now there's a new workflow that you need to get 500 practices with a multiple of that in terms of dentists and hygienists and back office folks to now become educated about and integrate into their day-to-day reality. Plus, you have a ton of turnover in these environments a lot of the time. So it's just like hard to keep up with that and make it work. And then it's hard to start making the gains. And the gains here from a diagnostic and clinical perspective are just so significant, but again, are only capturable with utilization.
Yeah, I think if you're a third-party marketing or patient communication tool and you're looking to run email campaigns, like it might be okay to work out of that third-party solution, just extract the data from the PMS and have a separate window because you've got a marketing team that's logging into that, not your office staff, not your clinicians, not your same team. But when it comes to clinical diagnosis and uncovering treatment plan opportunities, RCM functionality, all of that typically is right front and center within the teams in the practice or at a corporate level with a CBO or something. And we would hear integration thrown out a lot, and integration in the imaging AI world meant access to images for many people. It's like, can we get them? We have an integration. And I think what you've done in a really smart way, and not just with Planet DDS, we know you have this with Soda, you work with Patterson heavily. A lot of the players out there, is Curve is another one, is creating the opportunity to be able to be sitting within the workflow. So maybe how does that extend in the future? And what sort of ideas do you have for going beyond the diagnostic assistance, going beyond the auditing of historical images and uncovering treatment plan opportunities, driving case acceptance? But you've mentioned recently a new product that came out. Maybe talk a little bit about Claim Check, what that means and what you're going to be doing with that.
Well, I think you're asking a really good question. And for us, like everything I just talked about regarding radiologic AI and the integrated experience translates completely to like our 5-year roadmap. Because what we want to do, whether it's a scribe or just levels of automation in terms of like automated odontogram charting or sort of a whole host of other sort of clinical requirements, MS sort of follows that same argument. It's that if you want to add these layers of increasing value and automation and products and drive utilization, it's like, it's all one and the same, meaning you have two environments that folks are really comfortable in, if you're being realistic, right? You have an imaging PMS. Sometimes you'll have, an iOS interface or whatever, but like that's pretty much it. And if our goal is to drive customer delight and success and drive outsized outcomes for them in a way that is very low lift, then we want to continue to provide these layers of value via the PMS. So I would say one way to think about what Pearl is doing, and certainly what we're doing with Planet DDS, which is, again, super exciting, is extending the value add that we're able to generate from the imaging system to the PMS layer, the beating heart of the practice. So you talked about RCM and Claim Check, for example. I would say there it's very easy to describe what we're trying to accomplish there. It's much harder to achieve because it's a very sticky and juicy problem for sure. But that's why it's also valuable to solve. And one thing you want to do is basically generate and verify that claims are clean and complete. You want to add adjudication layers on top of that so that you can give the provider the opportunity to ensure that their claim is going to be approved. So there's an adjudication layer for all claim types, including claims with attachments, that is driven by the payer's own logic, by the way. So it's specific to the payer and material coverage and all of that. And then ultimately real-time adjudication. And that is kind of a holy grail. It's the one area that payers and providers really agree that this would be a terrific add-on, and patients as well. Like everyone wants this one thing very much. And we are a very provider-centric, provider-friendly, provider-first company. And it doesn't mean that we don't do work with payers to achieve these realities, but we always want to give the provider the ability to make sure that they have all the information and that they have the ability to act on that information before it goes over to the payer. Now, there's a lot of nuance to this in the integrated story in general. So if you think about it, if you're interacting directly with an imaging system, you're not grabbing a bunch of raw imagery and having to run a bunch of transformations on it and then go deal with the rotation issues. If you're working directly with the PMS, you're not having to go grab data and normalize that data, and then it's insufficient, or there's a change in the PMS and suddenly like everything breaks. Like if you're creating a solution in partnership with these platforms, then it's just a much more high quality, reliable service that also doesn't require so much of the headache and overhead that you would have to employ in order to run these services. So you're able to actually drive cost efficiencies there and pass those cost efficiencies on to the customer as well. So yes, a big part of what you're going to be hearing about Pearl over the coming months and years is around this sort of automation layer. Like we're doing something really interesting with you guys right now. I don't know if we want to talk about it or not with the image quality index. Let's go ahead and delight the audience. So we're working on something with Planet DDS called the Image Quality Index. I think we're actually going to probably rebrand it to Image Check. And it's a very simple capability, meaning we're able to look at a radiographic capture and determine if it's diagnostic or not. Is it cone cut? Is it overexposed or underexposed? Are there open contacts? Is there angulation? Whatever the case may be. Now, the other thing that we're able to do here is when we launch into an environment, we're able to look at the last, say, 18 months of captured data. And let's say, hey, look, 23% of all this data that you guys captured radiographically is actually not diagnostic, or it's actually very problematic for these reasons in these operatories or whatever the case may be. And here's a really elegant solution built directly into XVWeb that will just notify you in real time the moment this thing is captured that you should retake it for a particular reason and actually explain to you what that reason is. It's I would say, straightforward and improvement to the workflow, but adds significant value because if you're able to remove bad quality radiography, you're going to diagnose better, you're going to have better evidence, and all the obvious sort of benefits accrue from that. So it's a lot of little items like this that I think add up to a pretty profound change. And then we obviously have our set of products, which is like Second Opinion and Second Opinion 3D and Pre-Check and Scribe and Claim Check, and the list goes on. So we kind of differentiate between automation layer and actual full-blown products.
Yeah, talk a little bit more about Scribe. I don't think a lot of people are familiar with what Scribe is.
I mean, Scribe, I'll be honest with you, Scribe is a scribe, right? It does ambient listening and it generates high quality clinical notes in either SOAP format or according to the template of a practice. I think we do it really well. I think we also do it very cost effectively, which is nice, so we can pass those savings on. So the doctor gives unique approaches that we take. But the important thing here is that we're creating a terrific workflow that is embedded and integrated. So it doesn't require a bunch of overhead or brain damage to actually utilize successfully. So, the thing that I'm most excited about with Scribe is the embedded experience of Scribe, right? The native experience of Scribe. More than I want to sit here and pontificate how great we are at our Scribe. Like our Scribe could be as good as another company's Scribe, but I just think we have a better way to drive, again, customer delight and satisfaction and usage and utilization. And that's kind of an important difference.
No, I think it's helpful because when people talk about the input layer and they're saying, and you're talking about, well, look, you're going to have the equivalent of white collar worker ability to put these inputs into the practice management software. I think a lot of people's first thought is like, well, how though? Like, and here's one example. It's just through voice. Like there's an opportunity to automate input layer.
And also look at the odontogram charting. We do that via the clinical data that we're surfacing from the radiography. So we already have that. It's actually, we're working on this now with a number of partners and you guys as well, is just like charting this back into the odontogram. That's great. If you're talking about insurance verification eligibility, well, we grab that programmatically. We're able to write that back. I know you guys do interesting work there as well yourselves. So this isn't just kind of cute story. Like we have the ability to drive this automation today. And there's a bunch of pieces to put together and extended capabilities to build and all that, but it's real now.
Yeah, when you look at the strategy that you've taken also, I think another differentiator is your international approach. And I will say, I think we have at least like a dozen or so international listeners. One week, we were like the top dental business podcast in Turkey. I think Mehmet's mom might have listened to that episode. I'm not sure. But what do you think about your international approach? I think a lot of people just go, I'm going to start with North America. I'm going to start with the United States. Like the market's massive. Let's not dilute our attention and like, let's keep a focus. And you've taken a broader approach there. Why did you decide to do that? Where did you get the confidence that that was the right approach for you guys?
I think it was the right approach for us, although I think not doing it that way and doing what you said, which is focusing on North America first, is also a totally legitimate approach. The reason we took that approach is because, again, we think about this from a user-first perspective. And I mean, the way that I like to think about the capabilities that we're building is they're kind of market inevitabilities. We're just helping to bring them to market. One way or another, given a long enough period, with or without Pearl, like these things are all going to be utilized by everyone somehow. So the thing with radiologic AI in particular is that it really transcends language barriers. very easily because you're talking about a visual interface with the same kind of disease. There's not a lot of we do have our interface translated in like 10 languages or something, but that's 12 words or something in some settings. So first of all, just translates very nicely and very intuitively into operatories globally. Secondarily, I just have a lot of experience in internationalizing businesses. My previous company, GumGum, that you mentioned, operated globally across pretty much every developed part of the world. And I think that we were very successful with that model then. So the thinking was really that we should get ahead of this international question because it requires a huge lift. It's a lot of investment on the regulatory side of things, and you got to build that infrastructure and server infrastructure that is compliant with GDPR and all the privacy related requirements and all of those. There's a lot to do there. And because it's inevitable and because we have the interest and the funding to actually support that use case as well, let's go after it. And we did, and we're seeing a ton of growth internationally, especially in certain key markets across Europe and the UK and Australia and the UAE and other places as well. So I don't think it's necessarily the right approach. I think, again, it would be totally legitimate to just focus on the US, but he chose an expanded path.
And how do you think about the kind of totality of the AI market, maybe right now in the US from a dental perspective? I know there's obviously the expansion of all of the different offerings that you all are bringing to market. But what do you think of just the existing amount of practices in the United States using imaging AI? What sort of penetration do you think that we have now with that? Because to me, it seems like everyone should use it. And yet I'm still surprised at how many folks are not, including my own dentist. I wish they would buy Pearl and I could actually understand what I'm looking at.
It's funny. I get a lot of texts, probably once every week or two from a friend being like, oh my God, I went to a dentist and wherever, and they're using Pearl. It's so cool, So that is happening increasingly. I mean, look, we're adding almost 1,000 practices per month. This doesn't include months where you might get some huge enterprise account activity, all the other outliers in both directions. But if you think about the number of locations that there are in the US and globally, hopefully you would want to see an acceleration there to capture the whole market, but it is not a significant number of new offices, and that's also accelerating. So I think that we have exited the early adopter phase. We've entered into the mass adoption period, and this capability will be an absolute standard of care, just like I've been saying since day one, in practices within a 5-year period, especially because of the work that companies like Planet DDS are doing in terms of making it so turnkey to turn this thing on and to utilize successfully and generating awareness. That can't be overstated in terms of just how valuable that is, because part of the challenge here is just market education, letting people know that not everyone is going to ADSO and seminars and conferences every week. A lot of dentists, like my father, he never went to any of these things once. We had 4 friends and they would do their seminars and study groups together once a quarter, and that's it. And I think that's representative of a lot of dentists in the world. So you would need to entree them to it for the capability somehow.
It is interesting. I think we because we eat, sleep, live this day in, day out all the time, make these assumptions that people are aware, that people are educated, that people understand. And then it's well, how would they be aware? How would they understand? How would they know this if they weren't at the watering holes where they're consuming the information or the latest news or the latest updates? And I've shared this story on this podcast before, but in the chair at my dentist, I'm so are you guys using Curadon? And they're like, what's that? And I was like, man, I go to these shows and it's all I hear anybody talking about.
I have the same exact, I asked the same question to my dentist. I was curious, and they also did not know.
And they did not know. And it seems in the world within which we are operating, we hear about these things all the time, and we're privy to kind of the cutting edge technology that's driven in large part by a lot of DSOs that are very forward thinking and very innovative. But there still is that market to be reached and the education to be done. When you think about kind of the company history, it feels like you've really gone up market as of late. Do you find there on the independent and kind of emerging group side, are there still objections related to, I guess, an unwillingness to invite a technology into the practice that it can be perceived as doing somebody's job with folks that maybe have been practicing dentistry for a very long time? Or is that part of the education? Are we largely past that at this point?
I think we're largely past that. It comes up extremely seldomly. I think now we're in the mode of oh, everyone's using this technology. I know I need to. The question is like when and how. And one of the reasons I really like this application of is that we're really not replacing anyone's job. Like if you look at the clinician, like we are providing a clinical aid. We're not displacing a radiologist. Like this capability does in a lot of other forms of medicine. We're enabling them to be more complete, more comprehensive, to communicate much more clearly patients. And like dentists are just massively burdened individual. There's a huge amount of responsibility into few items, and it's a lot of overhead and a lot of stress. And we sort of look at what we are trying to do as kind of unburdening dentists in significant ways so that they can have better lives, but also issue better care and spend more time communicating with patients and actually engage in procedures and be empathetic and stuff like that.
Yeah, it feels like most founders over time, they kind of pivot or they learn about what they're doing in ways that were unexpected. And when you think about something that's either non-obvious or not communicated as often as far as a benefit of implementing Pearl into a practice, what are some of the things that like maybe they surprised you, or what are some of the lesser known things that are the benefits and outcomes that Pearl will drive?
I think that's kind of the other hidden piece of like just like the operation of a company. Like, are you a high quality company that is offering high quality service, but also like providing the right onboarding experience and training and ROI validation and just like creating an overall pleasant experience? Because this could be kind of like overwhelming. And if you take like practice intelligence and second opinion and like in the PDDS environment, it would be AI assist. There's an overwhelming amount of opportunities suddenly that you didn't have yet. You have just a huge amount of knowledge. You're like, it's overwhelmingly exciting, but also just like I feel like an avalanche of data and insight and opportunity. So we really tried to create a very catered, organized protocol for chopping this up into smaller bite-sized bits. And we do a bit of work for the practice initially, the first few weeks. And we show them how we're doing and what we're doing and what we're querying and how we're reading reports and how do we see what's been undiagnosed and who's coming in and what the opportunities. How do you actually measure the impact of how many more impactions have been treated or period cases, whatever the case may be. And by virtue of teaching them how to fish, but also doing so in a manner whereby you're also showing them real results, everyone's really engaged because they're super excited about like, this is my data, they're my practices. I'm seeing these outcomes manifest like before my eyes. I want to learn how to do this and do more. There's like a real art and a magic to that I think we had to just kind of like learn over time the right way to onboard and entree people into the set of capabilities without overwhelming them. And there's really two components here on the radiologic AI side, at least. It's like half of it is diagnosing more completely and better, and the other half is patient communication. And like what I like to say to doctors, even if they think they read radiology perfectly and don't need any assistance, is that like, don't you want your patient to have this visual experience of being able to understand what it is you're communicating to them, which is inherently just like almost impossible to do well, no matter how good of a clinician you are, when you're pointing to a bunch of gray smudges on an image, because nobody knows what that means. Like a cavity on an image to an untrained dentist looks almost perceptible. No idea. So I would say that's one thing.
Yeah. When you think about the industry as a whole right now, kind of taking a step back out of the Pearl world, maybe, what makes you most bullish about dentistry? Like what sort of tailwinds do you think are in place to really drive great outcomes in DSOs and practices and technology companies? Like what are some of the things that you think are going well right now for the industry?
Well, I really genuinely love this category and it's really fun to be operating in it. Let's start with what's challenging about it, maybe. And we'll get to what's exciting. So one of the things that's really challenging about dentistry, and some of this applies to healthcare at large, but some of it is kind of specific to dentistry, is that there was this massive fragmentation in this market on almost every level. There's dozens of PMS systems, there's dozens of imaging systems, and then there's dozens of versions of each of those systems. And that creates a real challenge for software companies that want to add layers of value. So I see this all the time in companies that we interface with. They're all dying on the same hill because they have this cool idea. They want to put this value into the world. And in order to do that, then they need to capture data and be able to process it. And everyone gets stuck on this normalization step. Like you have to ingest all these disparate data from all these disparate systems. And then on the image side, there's like proprietary stuff going on there. And it's hard to read in some cases and transform. So what I see happening as being very problematic is like 80% of a lot of software companies' effort is just on the data normalization problem. It's a completely non-unique problem to solve. It's necessary to solve if you want to achieve your ends, and you need a lot of money and resources to do it well. So like you have this kind of artificial barrier that nobody understands when they decide to launch these companies. They don't know that it's like the kind of shit show that it is, and then they get stuck and then they die or get kind of desperate, or it's really problematic. And like, I think there'd be a lot more rapid innovation in dentistry if things were just much more open protocol and standardized. And that's not the case. Even in the case of like any other form of radiography and other forms of medicine, is a DICOM, as metadata, as patient information, as rotation and quality information. Like you don't have that in dentistry. You often do just get a JPEG or something like that. And that makes it really difficult to operate in that environment. So that I would say is a challenge. Then obviously you have this very unique buyer set, or there's an enterprise, space and then kind of a solo location. And it's just inherently very fragmented, especially on the solo side. You have dentists in every nook and cranny of the country. What I will say is, in a lot of ways, it's nice to operate in this category because you also have like a very accessible entrepreneurial set of very interested sort of buyers and customers that want to do better and have a lot of autonomy over their own decision-making processes. You're not selling to like a large hospital group that's kind of slow and stodgy. And so there are benefits to dentistry that are also unique to the category. I think that everything that I'm observing, I'm seeing everything moving in really like the right direction. And I think that a lot of folks say like, what can we do to make adoption accelerate? And just like my honest view on it is like, yeah, it'd be great to grow faster, but I think the industry is doing just fine in terms of its adoption. I think it's all happening quickly. I think people are engaged. They are not stupid, meaning like if there's real value to be had, they're going to find a way to acquire that value. And I think that it kind of on some level goes to the input-output layer of stuff in terms of package operation. And it's going to be just a much more efficient and pleasant sort of reality to exist in. And anyway, I don't know. What do you think? What are you optimistic about dentistry?
I think there's definitely been a shift to standardization of systems, which as a practice management solutions provider, I find that encouraging. There had been for a very, very long time in the DSO space when money was cheap and M&A was rampant, that the approach was like, hey, just come affiliate, we'll purchase your practice, kind of the whole EBITDA stacking approach, and we will minimize any friction possible in the changeover of ownership. So you don't need to change your practice management solution. You don't need to change whatever technology you're using, whatever PRM solution you're using, go for it. You use Solution Reach, you use NextHealth, you use Lighthouse, like who cares? Like we're just going to still be successful with our outcomes because of what the economic environment was. And I think what I think is good for patients and for providers is that there needs to be a little bit higher level of rigor in the actual running of the business within these organizations, and those that are really adopting new technologies, implementing them well, and have created a culture of innovation, change, and forward-thinking practices are really going to excel.
Also, I would say in addition to that, is creating a culture of production versus a culture of frugality. And the reason I feel comfortable saying that in the context of healthcare, which could sound kind of icky, is that if you just look at the data, and we have access to billions of data points, there is a massive epidemic of underdiagnosis and just a lack of case acceptance. And if you just address those things, and you want to address those, your patient wants you to address that because it means you're capturing disease earlier and engaging more preventative care, you see production outcomes skyrocket. So I'm often kind of struck by these conversations that we have where people are really trying to shave off, $50 off the monthly fee or whatever. And it's just like, do you understand that if you just use this properly, you'll generate between 30 and 100K in incremental revenue per month, like consistently? And who cares about the $50? Like, so it's actually like reformatting your practice and production reality in the context of these capabilities. And it's just so much more profound. But folks are so used to kind of just trying to kind of grind down procurement. And like, it's okay to do that. Like, as a business, like you're going to want to get a good deal. But like, I think that's often the mark is missed. And part of what we see our job as being is like showing them the light, being like, look at what is going on here and how much opportunity for improvement there is. And that's kind of a fun process.
It's been the approach for so long. I talk about this with people quite a bit. It's interesting, like the focus on the bottom line versus the top line. And it happens so much in the procurement side where it's like we're thinking less about how to improve our business and more about whether this new solution that we're implementing is saving us compared to something else that we used before. The thing with what you're doing at Pearl is you don't have a line item in the budget that you get to sell against necessarily that they're already replacing because it's a new category that's been created. And so it has to be the education of here's what you're going to be driving, here's the benefit of the outcome. And I think if most practices are honest with the patients that they have today, they could grow their business significantly. And it doesn't necessarily need to be, I mean, there's all the talk about new patient acquisition, all of this. And while that's certainly important, especially if a lot are leaving the back door, there's an absolute opportunity sitting right in front of people. But it requires training, change management, rigor, operational consistency, a really standardization of solutions because your executive team and support organization needs to be able to support those offices in those endeavors. And it becomes very hard to do all of that if you're getting in the weeds with a whole bunch of random things that are not standard SOPs because you don't have the capability of following standard SOPs. And so I do think that this market, I came from restaurant hospitality. It felt like even though people lived on razor thin margins in restaurant hospitality, they were less concerned with bottom line. And they were like, hey, where can I find growth? And maybe because it is healthcare, there's less that's thought of as more of a dirty word. But here, even though there's a lot of people doing really well, there's still a focus on like the cost piece versus the outcome piece, which is really wild.
Top-line versus bottom line, exactly right. And I think often the problem with that is like you're just missing the forest from the trees with that mentality. And I get it relative to if you're buying like this scoop versus that scoop, but if this is not having a very dramatic impact on your practice, and you just shouldn't use the tool at all because something's broken, right? Like it is going to have a big impact almost by default. I have a question for you also. I'll turn the tables here. I don't know if it's instinct of the audience, but I've always been impressed by you because you're a sales leader. And in many ways, I am as well, even though it's not technically my title and all that. And I feel like we're similar in that we kind of get the X factor from aggressive sales. It's just feel growth to pursue somebody aggressively and be all over them. But at the same time, you need to get your message out there and drive sales. And I feel like you guys are obviously doing fantastically well. And you seem to have a very friendly, mellow, educational approach to how you communicate with people about the value proposition of your guys' tool sets. And I'm just wondering, what is your sales philosophy? And how do you think about approaching this? Because you seem to be doing it very well. You have a team that likes you a lot. Customers respond to it. And it doesn't feel icky, which I like a lot. So
Yeah, I don't like the ickiness either. I was actually just talking to Eric before we jumped on this during our 101 and I was sharing, I was like, look, our team is not high pressure and it's enterprise. So you can't be high pressure, nor should you. I think the biggest takeaway or key for a lot of the folks within our organization is helping people to understand challenges and pain points that they didn't realize were as painful as they actually are. And you can do that through a conversation, through highlighting something as simple as you don't have SOPs within your organization that your regional managers are able to manage to across the entire region, because it's impossible to have really effective SOPs for how you're going to check in a patient, care for a patient, treatment plan present to a patient if you're on different software solutions. And so I can tell you right now, your team is winging that because it's impossible. It doesn't exist because you have 17 different solutions within your organization. So why don't you let us help you think about that a little bit more? And the efficiency that you're going to gain is going to be a tremendous benefit that's going to create better, more consistent patient outcomes. And it's something that maybe people aren't thinking about in that way.
You're inviting them into a conversation, asking questions, and really trying to understand and identify what their pain points.
Yeah, it's got to be less about what we do and more about what they do, really.
But I always tell my team, we're actually going through a rebranding of our website right now. And a lot of the language on them, don't talk about what we do or what we're doing. Talk about what they're getting. That's what people care about, obviously. And that's what matters, right?
I worked with a very early stage startup before, and our founder went to MIT, very brilliant guy, but slide 2 in our slide deck presentation was his face and his pedigree and his background. And I was like, you know what? There's validity to establishing credibility with the individuals in the organization so that people understand that what you were talking about earlier exists, the ability to bring people live, the innovative vision that you have for the organization, where it wants to go. But ultimately, what the clients or prospects care about is themselves and their business, and they care much less about what you're doing. So when you're presenting a deck that's all about you, you miss the point entirely. Nobody actually cares. And it becomes very boring. So we've wanting to really reframe the approach to like, let's talk about your business, how we can help. And look, if we can't help, no harm, no foul. Like we'll be here 5 years from now. We'll shake hands now. We'll part ways. You can try one of our competitors, and when it doesn't work, we'll be here for you. Like, not a problem. We'll wait. We're patient. To your point, patient. And so always taking the approach of never burning a bridge, regardless of the decisions that are made, and just handling things in that way.
Oh, you got it. Sales tactics with Mike Huffaker.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, see, now you got me talking. I forgot that this is my podcast and you're the guest. No, that's awesome. Well, hey, back to you real quick before we wrap. As a two-time founder scaling startups, there's a lot of people that are entering the dental space right now with new technology. And one of the things that I see that I'm kind of curious about is sometimes it feels like people are trying to build a company around what is really just a feature or should be a feature in some broader set. How do you think about what would your advice be to somebody that's starting out with like a dental startup? Do you need to have like a broader vision? Can you start with something that's like a feature and pivot into something that can become a real business?
I mean, look, sometimes it's about you have massive ambitions to do a big thing and have a big impact and build a big company. And that can start with, like, if you have that mentality, you can kind of start that way. It's not ideal. Now, the challenge, of course, in dentistry with software, which is actually very good for companies like PGDS, is that it is so dominated by so few types of software, like in the PMS, that a lot of things could eventually become like a feature in that environment. And what does that mean? So one of the things that I see us as doing is making PMSs like really, really awesome. And then we work in a very complementary manner to those systems. But you see a lot of scribes out there right now because a lot of the magic with the scribe is happening with the foundational LLM model. And you see very few companies doing what we're doing because it's actually like super hard to build the core tech. So some features are specific, but very compelling and hard. Like if you actually were talking about cars prior to the recording and we were talking about Tesla, and it's like, I don't love a Tesla as a vehicle or the interiors or anything, but I always consider getting one if I need a new car because of the self-driving tech. That's really impressive and other cool technology they have. So that's a case of a feature being so compelling that I actually might want to actually buy that whole platform, that whole car. Whereas if you take the self-driving component out of it, I probably would never buy a Tesla. It's kind of interesting. So look, it's a confined space. It's not the biggest market in the world. If you're adding net new value, you have to make sure that you could actually get into that workflow. It's not trivial. I think there's no shortage of dental companies that have not done great and have gone out of business or had to pivot or there's a lot of that. Now, you also see certain types of companies, we're not necessarily one of them with the kind of work that we do, that are able to actually take their solution and apply it to analog environments. Like Weave is a good example where you can go to optometry or you can go to veterinary and stuff like that, but more horizontal, exactly. We're going very deep and vertical. It definitely behooves anybody before they launch a company to be very thoughtful, intellectually honest, and strategic about the opportunity at hand and how compelling their offering is. Because as you know, like building a company is very, very hard and it requires a huge amount of effort and commitment, and it kind of is all encompassing in nature. So you should be sure that like the mousetrap that you're bringing to bear with all that work, which if it's a great one or a shitty one, it's going to be the same amount of intense work, like is really like worth it and right.
Turning it back on you then for a second, like when you talked about with the initial desire of building a big company, is that how you started when you founded Pearl?
Well, I was just so early to computer vision. Like I'm 20 years in computer vision. In 2015, we had already built a fairly large company and I really wanted, and it was very obvious to me that this capability, this technology was going to penetrate into the radiographic reality and this become a standard of how you review radiography. And I was interested ultimately in working in healthcare before sort of the end of my career. And I just became excited enough about it that I was like, I'm going to apply this capability to a form of healthcare and landed on dentistry in a very studied way, an intentional way. We're building something that I think is an absolute standard of care. And we think of it as utility, just like every other utility in a practice. Now, will it get commoditized to zero over time? Like, I honestly don't think so, because I think that what seemed like a series of kind of point solutions and like, oh, there's a scribe here and there's a 3D thing there and there's a patient scheduling here. Like, it all seems kind of disparate and up in the air, but it's not. It's like really one and the same in terms of this like input output layer of reality. And they all talk to each other and work together and reinforce one another. So I really think that there was a lot of white space and a void in the dentistry of high quality software. I mean, we have an entire category that is populated by legacy companies, a lot of which are actually hardware oriented enterprises, or you have a lot of legacy kind of PMS. And I think even if you are the best, most advanced PMS player in the world, there's still a lot of stuff that you just is out of your purview and you're not going to do. So like, we have a great software company in dentistry. Why shouldn't that software company be Pearl or someone? Because it needs it. It's going to be better off for it. There are so many applications that we haven't even touched on this call that I think are just super interesting, that extend into all the way even to the consumer. Like, there's a lot to do here that's very advanced and interesting. So I don't think of what we do as a feature as much as like, I think us thinking about it as a feature in a way is, if this makes sense, like, is our advantage. The fact that we understand that this is best expressed in a certain manner with radiologic AI, I think is a huge advantage in and of itself. So anyway, we'll see.
Before I got into SaaS, which was just like 10 years ago, I read the Steve Jobs biography. I also read Larry Ellison, and I Googled SaaS. And that was my prep for moving into the technology world. But the Steve Jobs biography, part of what they talked about was that he had a reality distortion field. And I think that founders of companies often kind of have this. Where do you feel like you have that as well? Where sometimes your team is looking at you like, you're crazy. Like, no, we can't do this. But you just, in your mind, it's already like a done deal.
Yeah, I think all founders have to have that to some degree, but you have to temper it with the exact opposite, which is, I'm often living in, like, one of my employees said to me the other day, he's like, the difference between you and I is I'm obsessed with Pearl now and you're obsessed with Pearl in 5 years. There was actually a lot of truth to what he was saying. But like, I would just say you have to temper that reality distortion and kind of undying belief and philosophical perspective with intellectual honesty. So when you enter into a category, you don't know that much and everything seems like it's going to go a certain way. It's going to be phenomenally amazing and you're going to be a hero and everything's going to work out great. But then you learn a lot about like the moving pieces and the dynamics of the environment and the go-to-market motions. And you need to update your priors and be really honest about your prospects and also just how you're going about this whole thing. So one of the things that I feel I've been good at in my career is just like willing to look in the mirror very honestly and be like, this is the reality of the industry. Here's where you're exposed. Here's potential risk. And like just kind of having a real tether to the health of your prospects and not constantly living in fantasy land about it. Now, part of that is necessary and real and helpful, because if anybody sort of acknowledged or knew how hard it was going to be ahead of doing it, then a lot of people wouldn't do these things. And you have to also believe things that are not yet manifest in the world. Like, I believed when I launched this company that this would become a standard of care. Nobody had ever heard of it. When I would call people and try to talk about it, they're like, not interested. This seems like bullshit. Now it's become a standard of care. So like, you have to believe these things are like, you have to have a long-term view. But again, I would just like say that the thing I see happening less than that is updating the priors and maneuvering according to like what the realities of the market and the industry are telling you. And sometimes it tells you something so bad, which is, shit, this is not going to work. I got to go do something else. And that's called a pivot.
Yes, absolutely. Then you're out of dental and you're into vet or somewhere else. And you're like, no, we're going to use this for that. Last question for you. So I know you've got a son. I know you like woodworking. I've seen your shop before. You're a tennis player. You founded the business. How do you balance the hobbies that you have and finding like joy in your life outside of running Pearl?
It's so funny because as you were listing those things off, I was like, oh, all the things I don't have time for. There's no balance, if we're being honest, especially at this stage of the company. when my life finally got balanced after running my previous company for 11 years, to be fair, I got kind of bored. I started to started out. But if I'm being honest, I have an extremely imbalanced life. It's a huge amount of work. It's a huge amount of traveling for work. It's a huge amount of thinking about work. It's a huge amount of working. I don't mind that. I've kind of always wanted to do this since I was a kid. So like you get the thing that you want, you shouldn't complain about it. But nobody should pretend that it's balanced if you're doing it like this completely. And I think in a lot of ways, it's a very American mentality as well. It's one of the reasons Americans win it. That's a lot of the time, as well. And I don't think it's like the most sustainable or even healthy, but there's a time and a place for everything. And there's a time and a place to just grind and do great work and be super, super productive. And I definitely will say that has happened at the expense of woodworking and tennis significantly. I'm going to IDS on Friday. And then another thing, when you travel this much, you're kind of all over the place. It interferes a lot. I try not to have it interfere as much on the family side of things, but it interferes there as well. And that's just the honest answer. We try to keep it balanced to a certain degree, but if you're looking for balance, you shouldn't be an entrepreneur, at least for a hardcore, high growth startup with a lot of funding and high expectations for rapid growth. Now, you can be a lifestyle entrepreneur, and a lot of folks in dentistry have done that. Slowly and responsibly build a DSO, slowly and responsibly build a software company, or whatever the case may be. And that's a huge amount of virtue to that. I think that's terrific. It's just not like the path that I've been on. What about you? Are you balanced? You must be more balanced than me.
I'm not all that balanced. No. No. I'm a little obsessive. I'm like all in on everything that I'm all in on all the time.
It's also fun and exhilarating and rewarding. And, and it's like, there's a lot of momentum. When there's a lot of momentum, then sort of you double down. I don't really believe that burnout is a thing. Like, I don't think people get burned out. I think that the true cause of burnout is like trying really hard for an extended period of time and constantly being met with failure. And when that happens, then you could burn out. That is super exhausting. If you're working crazy hard and like things are going well and growing and like feeling healthy, then like it's a different thing.
Yeah, when you're winning, you can find what you need at any time. So I think more about things now about what I can stop doing, because I have a tendency just to collect responsibilities and to continue to do things.
I noticed that is part of the culture at PDDS. Very senior people doing things that they don't necessarily need to be doing, but holding on to them for unknown reasons.
It's out of a deep care.
Yeah, if I need care, absolutely.
Well, I just trying to drive you crazy with things, really. I mean, that's what it comes down to.
There are so many hours in a day, and you have to like fight the battles that are going to matter. But I'm not Jeffrey, and you guys are doing great.
Appreciate it. Well, Ophir, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. We'll have to do this again sometime. And hopefully you get more messages than you got out of the last time, and that'll motivate you to do.
The Ophir@hellocrawl.com. Shoot me a note, everyone.
Perfect. Sounds great. Thank you. The Dental Economist Show is brought to you by Planet DDS, home of Dental OS. To find out more about how cloud-based dental software by Planet DDS helps unleash dentists and their staff to focus on patient care, visit www.planetdds.com. Stay tuned for upcoming episodes by following wherever you listen to podcasts. And thank you for listening.